Emma!
I'm okay, just take him out!
Bouncing all over the place, I can't get a shot off.
We are talking FUBAR, which is the new Netflix 8-episode series that stars Arnold Schwarzenegger in somewhat of a comeback role. The first time he's fully committed to a TV show. Now, this seems to me like it was kind of True Lies the series without actually being True Lies the series. I know that True Lies was actually made as a television series that lasted one season that was cancelled. This is a very, very similar kind of setup to True Lies. It essentially focuses on the character played by Arnold Schwarzenegger called Luke, who is an aging spy who's kind of wanting to retire out the business. However, he is called upon to rescue essentially an operative who is on a mission that is gone dark ultimately, and he's specifically asked to do this mission as it pertains to a personal connection to him, but he doesn't know this at this point. And then he finds out that this other agent is actually his daughter, who is also a spy, and the pair of them have been lying to each other along with the rest of their kind of family members about their real jobs, each of them pretending they've got this kind of like somewhat mundane existence. Now the two of them have to team up and try and take down this terrorist with a kind of team of other kind of agents. What will happen? You will have to watch the series and find out. I will preface this by saying my review will be mildly spoilery, purely because I have to discuss a few things that I want to address within the kind of the pros and cons. There's nothing major, and this I'll be as vague as possible. It's very mildly spoilery only. Okay, so let's talk about. I actually have a lot to say, and for once, I've actually got notes rather than kind of off the top of my head, which is how I normally do it, because I've got a lot to say about this one. Okay, let's talk about the positives first of all. First of all, I think Arnie is actually quite on form here. I think he has that classic Arnie of being, a watchable kind of action hero, albeit obviously he's older now. Clearly he's, a lot of stuntman and things like this, but he still is a watchable kind of action hero, and I think they do a decent enough job here of his action sequences and making it look like Arnie, and he's obviously doing a little bit of it, but also having that kind of comedy element that Schwarzenegger has made it his own, certainly in the kind of maybe the second half of his kind of career. But I felt his character was very likeable and had a kind of a charisma about him, and feels like it's kind of more Arnold Schwarzenegger channeling himself through this particular kind of character, albeit obviously in this kind of fantastic role of this kind of spy character. I'd also say Emma, played by Monica Barbaro as his daughter, is also a very likeable character. I think she's got good chemistry with Schwarzenegger. They kind of play off each other quite well. And she's a very capable kind of spy herself, without kind of being a kind of a Mary Sue. She does fail a couple of times. She's not infallible. So that was fairly that was good. And I would say this series is fairly action packed. I mean, there's at least one sort of high octane action escapade in every episode. So if you're an action junkie, you'll get a lot of that. And there's also a variety of different locations. We get jungles, we get on a train, we get in a bank vault, we get all kind of action sequences in different kind of locales to give you that kind of variety. So if you are a big fan of the action movies of Arnie, they certainly have a lot of kind of high action here. Outside of some very obvious green screen, the production value is pretty good. I mean, it almost feels movie level. Almost. Doesn't quite. I mean, maybe you could say it feels like a Netflix movie, which is kind of like the $100 million kind of dollar range is what they go for. So it's not got the big blockbusters. But, you know, it feels like a high production. So, you know, with TV recently, in recent years, you know, with the likes of kind of Game of Thrones, we've been spoiled in regards to the production value compared to what we've kind of seen, you know, sort of 10 years ago, really. The production design has really increased on TV shows. And this really does look like, you know, a high budget kind of TV show. Obviously with a big, albeit a kind of age star in Arnold Schwarzenegger, but, you know, lots of kind of locales, lots of sets and things like that, and certainly looking at lots of action. So it does have you know, a bigger film. I mean, Schwarzenegger is really the only big name. You get one or two kind of cameos from some recognisable kind of actors, but he's really the only kind of real big name here, I would say. But there's a lot of, you know, on-screen kind of like money being spent in regards to stunts and CGI action sequences and things like this. It can be quite funny, albeit I don't think it lands all the time, but there are some kind of funny jokes here, and you know, there are some kind of quite funny characters. In particular, the characters of Rue and Alden, who are this kind of like other duo of spies who's kind of form part of this team. I thought they actually had quite an interesting kind of dynamic. You know, they've got this kind of like gigolo kind of like suave guy, and they're kind of like this butch kind of lesbian. But they kind of get on really well because of their sort of dynamic and things. And I thought they did have some kind of quite sort of funny moments and a few funny lines here. They don't all work, don't get me wrong, but there are one or two jokes, maybe more than one or two, that I did think here were quite funny. And just generally, you know, the hit rate is about 50-50 with the jokes, I would say. They nearly had an interesting villain. They didn't quite do it. But it came close. Now, again, without spoiling anything here, the villain has a personal connection to Luke, who is played by Schwarzenegger, and Luke feels somewhat responsible, as you'll see in the series, for the way this guy has turned out. And I thought that could have been, you know, a nuanced moment. It is mentioned and it is kind of brought up, but I don't think they could have done enough with it. I mean, ultimately, he's kind of a, you know, one of these typical bad guys who kills his kind of like subordinates for being insubordinate. He wants to kind of like sell nuclear weapons. It's very sort of typical kind of like, you know, rich bad guy. You know, he's ruthless and etc. They had an opportunity. They could have introduced this element, but I didn't feel they ran with it. But at least it is kind of there, I would say. So it skirts it a bit with no real kind of pathos. There's lots of homages to previous works of Arnold Schwarzenegger. If you're a fan of Schwarzenegger's back catalogue, you'll hear lines, you know, where he kind of deliberately sort of says things like the word chopper instead of helicopter, things like that. There are sequences which are kind of like recreated from kind of previous movies. So if you're a fan of Schwarzenegger's kind of back catalogue of movies, I feel there is a, you know, a somewhat to enjoy here in regards to that. I mean, you could say nostalgia has its downside, but if you are a fan of Schwarzenegger from nostalgia, then you may want to check it out. Right. Now I'm going to get into what I think does not work, and I'm going to go into quite a bit of detail with this. Okay. One of the big things for me with this series, now we have to say, this is a series which is in a kind of hyper reality. If you look at like a spy show, like for example 24, you could say arguably, I mean that was still, you know, a little unbelievable at times, but you could still believe it would happen in our kind of reality. This one, you know, it's more Spy Kids than Real World, I have to say. You could argue that it's a similar kind of feel to and tone to True Lies, and I think that's definitely, it's channeling that. But I feel in this day and age, it's, you know, the tone is not serious, not kind of like a genuine kind of like, you know, dramatic action kind of series. So there's no stakes, unfortunately. No one ever feels in danger. You never feel like the good guys will lose. Even when a character gets hurt and they're put in peril on screen, you never really feel that anything's actually going to happen to the character. So I feel the tone would have worked better had it been a little bit more on the dramatic side, had it been a little bit more on the kind of the real world side. Now, you compare this to Stallone, who is obviously a peer of Arnold Schwarzenegger. He recently did a TV show called Tulsa King, which I feel, you know, it had comedic elements, but that to me was a little bit more grounded, and therefore the dramatic side of stuff came through a little bit more. This one, it's a cartoon, to be honest with you. It is a cartoon where you never feel like anyone's really going to get hurt, or there's not any stakes in, so that kind of deflates some of what would have been an exciting series. I've got to say, that kind of goes hand in hand with that, it is hard to buy into this premise. I mean, it just seems crazy to me that the CIA would intentionally team up a father and daughter in kind of field ops, because surely they would, you know, their integrity would be compromised. They wouldn't necessarily finish a mission, or they would put their safety of their family member first before kind of completing a mission. So even the central premise of this, I feel, just is too goofy, to be honest. I mean, it would have been better had they been maybe rival kind of like agencies or something. One's CIA, one's like, you know, FBI or something like that, and they happen to kind of find out. That would have been better, but I think them both literally being on the same team, the same briefing room, I don't know, it just makes it like, again, it's that goofy kind of cartoonness of it all. You know, you could look past that, you could say, fine, you might be able to buy into that, to be honest with you, but, you know, I thought I would have to kind of mention that. It is very predictable, is the next thing. I mean, like, you know, every mission, the kind of the series is a little bit like one of these old serials. I actually think it would have been better off going week to week, because it's like one of these old-fashioned serials where at the end of the majority of episodes at least, there's like, oh, how will our heroes get out of this kind of situation, and then they immediately get out of it in the first kind of 5 minutes of the next episode. But every episode here is like, they have a mission, something goes slightly wrong, they're able to kind of like improvise and kind of get over the kind of the problem, and then ultimately the heroes kind of win the mission, the bad guy kind of gets away and to fight another day, you know, etc, etc, rinse and repeat. It's very, very predictable within that kind of format. I feel this should have been around 4 to 6 episodes. It's 8 episodes as it stands at the moment. This story lags for me. It feels like it's treading water. Each episode follows more or less the same kind of format, albeit the window dressing is a little different. But you know, it starts to sag in the middle, because you kind of feel like you're treading water, and it's just like, yeah, okay, we're kind of like, you're not really kind of moving the story forward a hell of a lot. There is a little bit too much bickering in this. You know, we have all these kind of family dynamics, and yes, you know, we have like these kind of like emotional can of worms are opened up when, you know, father and daughter learn that they're both obviously working for the CIA, and both have been, like, you know, lying, which to me, you know, I understand you would have conflict in that, but I also understand, you know, I also think surely that would put you in a position where you understand why they've had to do it. But it just seems they go so far and kind of like sort of make up, and then they end up falling out again. It gets a little tiresome, I have to say, but it's not even restricted to just them, because we have everyone else of arguing at one point, and it's this kind of inflated drama to kind of like pad out episodes and kind of like give us more running time, which I didn't think it necessarily needed. Next up, we have Hollywood's depiction of nerds. If you've ever seen a movie called Just 17, that's a good example of what Hollywood thinks nerds are like. There's a character here who's like the tech guy of the kind of the team, and he is just like constantly dropping, you know, references to different kind of like geek cultures and stuff like that, and you know, he's not the fighter, and he's the kind of like he's rubbish with women and things like this. It's just like, it's such a kind of stereotypical kind of version of what Hollywood kind of puts out in kind of regards to nerds. And, you know, he's got all his toys all around. And, you know, there are aspects of that what obviously do happen, but it's just such a stereotypical, you know, example of it where Hollywood doesn't really understand, like, and so they just kind of go with what they think and things like that. So yeah, there's a character called Barry where I feel that was, you know, a little bit embarrassing, to be honest with you. Useless characters, talking about characters, useless characters. You forget Arnie actually has 2 children in this. His son is a useless character who has no bearing on the story whatsoever, or near enough. And you even forget he even exists half the time. It's like, why bother having a second kind of, you know, child when he contributes literally nothing to the kind of the story, or very little to the actual overall kind of story, when you just forget he exists? Seems like a, you know, seems like an odd choice. But let's stick with the characters because I have more to say about that. And unlikely character dynamics. I find it highly improbable. I wouldn't say impossible. Highly improbable. An alpha female like Emma, the daughter of Stallone's character, would be interested in this kind of like this beta male sort of love interest that she's got, a very kind of like nerdy, kind of like dweebish kind of guy, but he's got a good heart and all of this. It seems like they want to go for this nice guys can get the girl sort of thing that like Disney stuff puts out, and I guess it could happen here and there, but it just there's no chemistry. It seems so mismatched. It feels like, again, it feels like something someone has written rather than something that would kind of happen in kind of real life. I mean, you know, a very kind of active and you know, sporty and kind of like fit woman who does this job, I can imagine not going for someone like this, to be honest with you. It feels fake. Let's go touch again on the comedy. I think some of it works, but I think some of it feels very forced, very kind of written by committee and things like this. And I have to say, generally, this group of characters feel like more like a group of college kids at a party rather than kind of a group of professional spies. You know, again, we're talking about that tone again and kind of like this kind of like jokey kind of tone, but yeah, it doesn't work for me. Weird moralizing. We have these 2 guys from this kind of rival gym who are kind of treated like antagonists, but let's be honest, they're actually kind of in the right, but they're kind of like bad things happen to them and they're kind of like treated as sort of, you know, quasi-antagonists. But think about what they've actually tried to do and what they accuse people of. They're actually in the right, but that's not all. We're talking about this whole like cheating and infidelity thing. You know, we kind of like Emma Schwarzenegger's character's daughter cheats on her boyfriend, and we kind of really feel bad for him, and like, you know, she's in the wrong, but she's kind of conflicted. The series wants to think that, but then Schwarzenegger has an affair with his wife, or his ex-wife at this point, who is seeing someone else, but we're kind of, the series kind of wants us to be on Schwarzenegger's side. So it has this kind of weird quandary of kind of morality that I feel it's just like all over the place. You know, this doesn't work for me. So that's kind of my feelings on it. I'm gonna give this one a 5 out of 10. I nearly gave it a 4. I'm not gonna lie. I thought this was actually quite hard to get through. I couldn't sit through it in any more than 2 episode chunks because I just did not feel it was engaging. It's big budget. It's kind of lots of kind of like stuff on screen. You'll enjoy it for that. Schwarzenegger's watchable, but the actual story itself I found very juvenile. The characters didn't make sense. The writing was poor. So it's a 5 out of 10, and I give it that because of the sort of spectacle and just the kind of like the on-screen kind of carnage that you'll see. But it's a very kind of like, I give it a 5, but it is saying that with gritted teeth. What did you think, mate? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time.